Hello and welcome. Today we are diving deep into what you might call the conscience of the Indian Constitution, a fascinating and ambitious set of goals known as the Directive Principles of State Policy.
So, imagine this for a second. What if a country's most important document didn't just lay down the rules of the game, but also handed the government a to-do list, a set of homework assignments for building a better nation? Well, that's pretty much what India's Directive Principles are all about. They're a grand vision for the future.
All right, so what exactly are these guiding principles? Well, the best way to think of them is as the Constitution's moral compass. It's constantly pointing the government in the direction of a more just, more fair society.
Okay, so the official name is the Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSPs for short. You'll find them in Part 4 of the Constitution. And fun fact, the idea was inspired by the Irish Constitution. Now, don't let that word guidelines fool you. The Constitution itself says they are fundamental in the governance of the country. That's a pretty big deal.
Here's a really cool way to think about it. If the Constitution is the body of the nation, the directive principles are its soul. They're kind of like a government's New Year's resolutions. They're aspirational, they're full of good intentions, and they're a constant reminder of what it should be striving for.
But, and this is absolutely crucial, there's a huge difference between these and your fundamental rights. You can't just walk into court and sue the government for not achieving a DSPP. And that was a very deliberate choice. The framers knew that a brand new, resource-strapped India couldn't promise everything all at once. So they created a roadmap. Think of it this way. Fundamental rights are there to protect you from the state, while these directive principles guide what the state should be doing for you. And this guidance, it actually comes in 3 distinct flavors.
See, the people who wrote the Constitution didn't have just one single idea for India's future. They had a few. And so, these principles are usually grouped into 3 main categories, each one representing a different powerful vision for the nation.
First, we have the Socialistic Principles, which are all about creating a welfare state. Then, there are the Gandhian Principles, which are rooted in Gandhi's vision of rural self-sufficiency. And finally, the Liberal Intellectual Principles, which push for a modern, rational state. So let's break each of those down.
The socialistic principles? These are all about building a society where economic and social justice are front and center. They tell the state to do things like ensure equal pay for equal work, provide free legal aid to those who can't afford it, and make sure working conditions are humane. Basically, this is the blueprint for a classic welfare state.
Then you have the Gandhian Principles. These reflect Mahatma Gandhi's vision of an India built from the villages upward. We're talking about things like organizing village panchayats for local self-government, promoting cooperative societies, and a principle that, let's be honest, remains incredibly sensitive and debated to this very day: the prohibition of cow slaughter. And rounding out the trio, we have the Liberal Intellectual Principles. These are focused on building a modern, rational nation. They include goals like protecting our environment and wildlife, making sure the judiciary is independent from the government, and promoting international peace. And it also contains another hugely debated and still unrealized goal: creating a uniform civil code for all citizens.
Okay, so we've got these enforceable rights on one side and these non-enforceable goals on the other. So what happens when they clash? Which one wins? Well, this has been one of the biggest constitutional tug-of-wars in India's history, and it's played out dramatically in the Supreme Court.
The court's thinking on this has really evolved over time. It went on a whole journey. Way back in 1951, the court was firm. Fundamental rights will always win, period. But then, fast forward to 1973, in the landmark Keshavananda Bharati case, and things started to shift. The court introduced this idea of a basic structure, the unchangeable core of the Constitution, and started talking about finding a balance. This all came to a head in the 1980 Minerva Mills case, which finally settled the debate.
And here it is, the final word from the court. It was both clear and profound. The Supreme Court ruled that the harmony and the balance between our rights and these directives isn't just a nice idea. It is part of the basic structure of the Constitution itself. You can't alter it. They're like 2 wheels of the same chariot. The nation simply can't move forward without both of them working together.
So this is all fascinating constitutional theory, right? But has any of this actually made a difference in the real world? Oh, you bet it has. And this for me is where it gets really exciting, seeing how this constitutional to-do list has actually been turned into real policies that affect millions of lives.
The real-world impact is just staggering. You've heard of MGNREGA, right? The massive rural employment scheme that provides a livelihood for millions? Well, that flows directly from the Right to Work Directive. The fact that free legal aid exists, that's thanks to Article 39A. our big environmental protection laws, even the midday meal scheme that feeds millions of school children every day, all of them are the direct result of these principles. They are the quiet, constitutional engine behind some of India's biggest social wins.
And it gets even more powerful. The courts have actually used these non-enforceable principles to expand our enforceable fundamental rights. The best example of this? The right to education. It wasn't originally a fundamental right, but the Supreme Court took the right to life and read it along with the Directive for Education and basically said you can't have a meaningful life without education. And just like that, a non-enforceable goal helped create a fundamental right. It's an incredible synergy.
So, as we start to wrap this up, what is the true legacy of this constitutional blueprint? Well, it's really a story of ambition, of finding balance, and of making a real-world impact.
All right, let's do a quick recap. First, the Directive Principles are the moral compass, the conscience of the Constitution. Second, you can't take them to court, but they are absolutely fundamental to how India is supposed to be governed. Third, their ultimate goal is to create a true welfare state. Fourth, the courts have made it clear that balancing these goals with our rights is essential. And finally, many of the progressive laws we see today are the direct children of these visionary principles.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty big question. One of the most talked about yet still unrealized directives is Article 44's call for a uniform civil code. Now, after more than 75 years of independence, is this an idea whose time has finally come? Should unifying the country's personal laws be a priority right now? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you found this explainer useful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.